All right, so many of you, we changed the survey format this week in terms of ensuring that we don't repeat some of the survey questions. We kind of went into some of your additional questions, especially since we're trying to consider additional topics to bring, right, that you might be interested in. And we certainly still have a lot of health and safety questions that you guys raised. I think there was some concern about racial discrimination and hate crime, which I think many of us are, worried about, given that there's been this misperception that COVID-19 came from Asia and is an Asian thing, and it doesn't help when certain leaders, are perpetuating that notion as well. So that may be causing some stress, in terms of the social front. And then we have concerns on the job and macroeconomy perspective. People are concerned about, renewing their visas, about, finding jobs, about relocation to Singapore. Those are certainly, topics that folks are I think, that's why we have today's session as well with Junwen, because then you can talk a little bit about some of these key topics and concerns, right, that may be helpful to some of us. And then, of course, we have very specific questions on immigration that Junwen, is also going to be discussing in some generality and giving some background on, given some of our core concerns at this point as well. So that helps us kind of go to an understanding of who's actually on the call today, right? And the many of you who have responded to the survey results. So many of you here have been around in the U.S. for an estimated about 7 years so far. And, when we asked what was your key reason for coming to the U.S., many of you said it was to work, which is great compared to studying, right? So we have that element. Very few actually came for other personal reasons, like, because their spouses had to come here and then they accompanied them, at least from the cohort of folks of you who are on the call today. Many of you certainly have a whole range of different visa types. And this was actually particularly helpful, I believe, for Junwen as well, to understand the type of, visas that we hold here as a community, as he pushes forward to address some of the issues that we have, right? So as you can see, a large portion of us are actually on H-1B visas, and a second category around which is H-1B1, Singapore, as well. Junwen, I know you're on as at this point as well. Can you perhaps give us a sense of what these different visas mean? I know maybe you're covering some of that later, but reflecting on this, does this surprise you, or can you maybe give us a sense of what these different visa categories are?
Overall, I'm not super surprised. As you mentioned the previous slide, most Singaporeans here are they come here to work. But one thing that I'm pleasantly surprised is to see the different visa categories being relatively evenly spread out. So you have people here on people here on F1 student visas, a lot of them here for college or for grad school. You have people, or their spouses, and you have J1s who maybe are here for internships or traineeships or other exchange visitor reasons, like if you're here as there are some J1 people who are actually in research positions as well. And then you have the E1, E2s, which is a pleasant surprise. That means they are entrepreneurs here in the and then you have the H1B and H1B1. So you have a lot of professionals here. And it's nice to see some L1s as well. Meaning, they're probably here in a managerial role from an international company with international offices. And it's also very heartening to see people on O1s. Because these are for aliens of extraordinary ability.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's good. It's a good mix. And you can roughly tell even from the visa categories what industries they're in. A lot of people who are on O1s are actually in the arts industry, but you can have O1s in different industries as well. But But anyway, it's very heartening to see all these different categories. That means, you know, Singaporeans are really contributing here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and we have a A1 diplomat visa as well at the end. So probably one of our people here from the organizing committee.
That's great. Yay, you have a
Yeah, but
representation
a good,
too. Yes. Go ahead, Junwen.
oh yeah, it's a very healthy distribution. Singaporeans are contributing to the U.S. economy, and yeah, so not very surprising. I think people here, come here to study or work. That's very that's not surprising for a country like Singapore.
Yeah, that's amazing. Really good to hear that bring that color to the ranges. I had no idea some of these categories even existed. So thanks for that color. Glad, I know you'll be going through some more of this information later on. So perhaps let's push ahead and cover this as well. The next slide. So this is again immediate plans in the U.S. Many of us here are saying that we'll continue their jobs as it stands. Very few. I think as we look at the different categories, you certainly see some of these different options, right? Some folks are actually returning. There's one or two returning to Singapore as soon as the semester is done, so they're finishing school and then going back. And then we actually have a couple of folks that are actually starting a new job as well. So certainly we see a number of Singaporeans in transition, many of course, but fortunately majority of whom are going to continue working, and a number of us are looking for new jobs. And so I think the immigration issues are going to be pertinent, right, as we look at how we transition from one role to another and whether we find jobs in the meantime. This brings us to a great segue in terms of introducing Junwen. Junwen, many thanks for joining us here today to talk about immigration issues in a COVID-19 world. Certainly, it has been quite a transformation for us as a world going through this. And one of the things that's been coming up in recent weeks are topics related to immigration. So love to have you introduce yourself and to talk about this topic. Once again, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Sure. Anyway, so hi, I'm Junwen. I'm originally from Hougang, and yeah, I went to law school at NUS, was a lawyer in Singapore before I came here to California to get my second law degree. And after that, met my wife here, and the rest is history. And if you ask my close friends, they'll probably tell you I'm the last person on their mind to be settling down here in the US. But anyway, I specialize in US immigration law, and that's been part of my very specific area of focus for over 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's from the professional side. But I'm also a jazz pianist, so I play with different jazz groups in LA. But I guess now because of COVID-19, we've unfortunately stopped playing together.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully can find some way to still play down.
Well, that's great. Sounds like you're someone with extraordinary ability too. So welcome on board. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Anyway, if you guys end up feeling like you've benefited from today's talk, I want to give a lot of credit to Jasmine because I think she's an excellent moderator. I was here for the last talk, and I was like very, very impressed. And so Jess, want to take this opportunity to thank you as well.
Oh, you're welcome. We're just really honored to have Singaporeans step up to the plate and share, right, some of their capabilities. We understand, of course, Junwen, that your advice here is informational and general in nature. It's certainly hard to deal with all the different specific questions that have come through as part of the pre-survey that all of us, our participants here, have responded to, right? And of course, they can reach out to you for one-on-one advice as well when it comes to specific, questions. So definitely appreciate the prep that you put into this, together with, and of course, everyone's efforts, right, as a community to give you some inputs in terms of, what our demographics were and what our concerns were in the past couple of days. So thank you all out there, Singaporeans. We're always super good in being prepared. So Junwen, we're really glad that we can make this a constructive discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, just a quick note. I've seen many of the questions on the survey. I want to apologize in advance that we will probably not be able to deal with very specific questions, because if we end up doing that, there'll be no time, because I'll probably end up spending 15 minutes for one person's specific situation. So even from a time and planning point of view, it might not be ideal. I'll provide as much general answers as I can, but I just want to let you know that I understand your questions. I do have answers to them, but we can see if we can feel free to connect individually so that I can address the more specific questions to your specific case.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. That's completely understandable.
Okay, so I want to start off by educating us about the different U.S. federal agencies that you will frequently encounter in the U.S. And this is because, unlike Singapore, where when you talk about immigration, it's just the ICA. But here in the U.S., you have different federal agencies, and it tends to get confusing. And so I just want to try to educate us briefly about this. So you can see here there are different federal agencies, different branches of the federal government shown in the chart here. And you have first the Department of State.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the Department of State where this is the agency that's focused on overseeing all the embassies and consulates outside of the US. So when you're talking about visa applications to get a visa in your passport, you're dealing with the Department of State. Yeah. The other major department is the Department of Homeland Security. And in short, this deals with in the US instead of outside the US. And so under the DHS, under the Department of Homeland Security, you have the USCIS, as you can see. And for USCIS, and for those of you who are here, especially working here, you might deal with the USCIS. So USCIS basically deals with most applications for immigration benefits in the US. For example, if you're applying to extend, your status, you want to maybe apply to adjust status to ultimately get a green card. You go for green card interviews here in the US. This is under USCIS. Now, the other one under the Department of Homeland Security is the CBP, Customs and Border Protection. These are the guys usually you see when you come into the airport and then they stamp your passport. These are the CBP officers. They are the ones who admit you into the US. They stamp your admission stamp and usually put down your the expiration date for you to stay in the US. And they also update your I-94 record. Some of you know what an I-94 record is. It states, your expiry date on the status that you were admitted in. This is covered by the CBP. Finally, you have the ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So ICE is very interesting. It actually deals primarily with the enforcement in the US. So sometimes you have, ICE agents apprehending illegal immigrants. That's ICE. But very interestingly, they actually oversee the student and exchange visitor program here in the US too. Mm-hmm. So for people who are here, for instance, on F1 student status, your records actually goes to the overseas for the student and exchange visitor program system that's overseen by ICE. For some reason, that's how they do it. So yeah. Anyway, you have USCIS, CBP, and ICE under DHS. But they're also federal. Just a footnote. There are also other federal bodies that impact immigration. So you have the Department of Justice, the DOJ, which actually oversees the immigration courts. These are for the deportation cases. And you have the Department of Labor, which actually certifies certain documentation needed usually for employment-based immigration cases. Like for example, some of you may know what an LCA is. The LCA is actually certified by the Department of Labor, the document itself.
Mm.
So you have these different federal agencies, and unfortunately it's confusing, and sometimes people may not know which is the most appropriate agency that their case is under. But to put it very simply, the Department of State usually deals with if you're outside the US. And then for DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is when you are inside the US. So that's one way to remember.
Got it. That's really helpful. Thank you.
All right, so next step, next slide. So now I just want to clear up some definitions as well. So that later on when we talk about other things, the words won't be too confusing, hopefully. So a lot of you guys use the word visa, and yeah, it's often the appropriate term to use, but officially speaking, a visa is the official document issued by the DOS. You recall DOS issues the visas from the consulates and the embassies overseas, like the one in Singapore, that's embossed in your passport, that allows you to enter the US with your visa category indicated on it. So for example, people on H1B1 Singapore visas, you have the H1B1 Singapore visa, issued to you by the DOS, through the US Embassy in Singapore. And then you have that in your passport and you come into the US. And I often call it the entry ticket into the US, the entry ticket, because that's, essentially it functions as an entry ticket. Then you have two different types of visas. You have the non-immigrant visa and the immigrant visa. So non-immigrant visas, are just issued to people who want to enter the US temporarily. So, if you come here on a tourist visa, it'd be B2 non-immigrant visa, because non-immigrant, you're here temporarily. Say you're here for H1B. The H1B visa is a non-immigrant visa because there's a limited time frame for it. And you have other examples like the L1 or the O1. But bottom line is, when you talk about non-immigrant visas, it's basically not permanent resident, not coming here to obtain a green card. These visas are non-immigrant visas. Then the next one is obviously the immigrant visa, and it's one that you use to enter the US to live here as a permanent resident. But so we're talking about the visa that's embossed in the passport. So it's not the actual green card. So for people who were issued the immigrant visa and they come here on the immigrant visa, they will later receive their green card. So very basic terms, you have non-immigrant visas and immigrant visas. And I mentioned this because later on when I talk about the executive order, you can see why. Finally, immigration status. So it refers to the way that in which you are currently present in the US, under the eyes of the US government from an immigration point of view. That's my layperson's definition of it. But for example, you enter on H1B1, you use your H1B1 visa to come in. After you've been admitted into the US, in the US, your immigration status is H1B1 status. Or if you come in as a student, F1 student, you're in F1 student status. And so I mentioned this because sometimes we confuse the word visa with status, but they are technically different. The visa is when at least from an immigration point of view, visa, you're talking about that document that's embossed in your passport that functions as an entry ticket. When we talk about immigration status, is basically your status in the U.S. You can be on legal permanent resident status, you can be on H-1B status or L-1 status. It's different from the visa because you use the visa to come in, and sometimes people change status, and so that would when you first come in on F1 on your F1 visa and you started off with F1 status, and then later after that you change to H-1B status, and we're talking about the status there. Because originally you came in on F1 visa, which is different from your current status in the US. So anyway, people in valid non-immigration status in the US, very generally speaking, may apply to extend their status, change their status, say to a different non-immigrant status, like from F1 to H1B, for example, H1B to L1. Or adjust their status. When we talk about adjusting status, it refers to converting from your current non-immigrant status, for example, H1B to permanent resident status, which leads to which when you get the green card, if you're eligible. So this usually occurs in the US, because we're talking about status in the US. So usually the main federal agency you're dealing with is the USCIS. So yeah, I just want to clear up some little things here. So that hopefully it gets a bit clearer later on.
That's great.
Okay, so US immigration landscape under the Trump administration. In summary, it's just under the phrase "Buy American, Hire American." Like if there's any phrase I can really use to really summarize the entire U.S. immigration landscape now, as it pertains to Singaporeans, because we are mainly here, as you can see, mainly here to work. It's Buy American, Hire American. So this was in accordance with his Buy American and Hire American executive order signed April of 2017, and is to the state objective is to create higher wages and employment rates for U.S. workers by rigorously enforcing and administering the immigration law. So, so in short, they are immigration applications, whether it's DOS or with USCIS, they are currently being processed under this spirit of Buy American, Hire American, BAHA in short. A lot of immigration lawyers like myself just call it BAHA, and this really explains why and some of you may have encountered this where you have more difficulty getting cases approved, especially some of you know this, like you have requests for evidence issued by USCIS asking for more evidence because they scrutinize applications more under the spirit of Buy American, Hire American. In short, it just makes immigration currently it's a bit tougher on immigrants under the current administration. So yeah, this is the current US wider context. Is the current, this is under the wider context, but we'll talk about the COVID-19 as well in the next slide. Okay, so immigration in the US currently is not easy under the current administration, but COVID-19 has definitely made things more complicated. So I've set out the chronology here. How US immigration policies have changed in response to COVID-19. So first, January 30th, the WHO declared it as a public health emergency. And then one day after, President Trump declares it as a national emergency here in the US. On the same day, he issued an executive order, the Presidential Proclamation 9984, suspending entry for aliens who were physically present in China, but excluding Hong Kong and Macau for the past 14 days. So there are some exceptions, but in general, that's what happened. And then, almost 1 month later, he did the same, but with respect to people who were in Iran for past 14 days preceding their entry. And then March 11th, WHO officially declares COVID-19 to be a pandemic. And on the same day, President Trump issued another executive order, this time round for people who are physically present in the Schengen area in Europe. At this point in time, it excluded the UK and Republic of Ireland. But if you go on to the next slide, very shortly thereafter, he did the same for UK and Republic of Ireland. So this creates a lot of problems. Yes, there are exceptions. For example, if you're a green card holder, it's still okay. But this it really impacts people who have been in these countries for the past 14 days. And so you have that issue because you probably read in the news, people were just it was quite chaotic. Okay, so that's one thing. The next 4 days later, USCIS temporarily suspends, in response to COVID-19, suspends all routine in-person services. So some of you, you may have gone through the immigration process. You may have been asked to go to a USCIS office, local office, to do your fingerprinting, so that they can conduct background checks on you. These services are currently suspended. Green card interviews, those of you waiting for your green card interviews, suspended. So no in-person green card interviews currently due to COVID-19. Next, 2 days later, March 20th, DOS temporarily suspends all routine visa services at embassies and consulates. So again, delays in, or actually even for some people, especially at that time in Europe, people started receiving cancellation notices for their already scheduled interviews. Having said that, currently the status is that emergency appointments are still available, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. March 21st, you have this thing with Canada and Mexico, because US actually agreed with Canada and Mexico to suspend non-essential travel between the US borders with Canada and Mexico. And then March 27th, USCIS temporarily suspends premium processing service. This is an expedite service for certain visa categories. So it's currently suspended across the board. So things have slowed down. And then April 22nd, the most recent one, is the Presidential Proclamation suspending entry of immigrants who present risk to the US market during the economic recovery following the COVID-19 outbreak. So that's the latest one. Purportedly trying to protect US workers due to COVID-19. And you can see this is kind of in line with the Buy American, High American type of spirit. And I'll touch on that here because that's the latest one. And that initially caused a bit of chaos and a little bit of stress too. when he first tweeted it, and we didn't know the details. But I'll share some of the details here on the next slide. Yep, so you have this temporary suspension, but I just want to touch on a few points here, and you can read it on the slide. But it's a 60-day suspension for anybody seeking to enter the US as an immigrant. So we're talking about immigrant, okay? So non-immigrant, you know, the B1, B2s, they're not covered by this executive order. It affects immigrants and immigrants who are outside the US. So so if you're in the US, you're not impacted. Like for example, if you're in the US doing an adjustment of status, waiting for your green card interview, you are not impacted by this executive order. Yeah. So anyway, it applies to people who are outside the US on the effective date of the proclamation, so April 23rd. Does not have a valid immigrant visa yet on the effective date. So for example, there are some people actually, maybe not a lot, but there might be some people, let's say it's already an employment sponsored case for them. But they're in Singapore because they're waiting for their immigrant visa interview to get their immigrant visa. So this is affected. These people would be affected. For 60 days, they would not probably be able to get to their interview for, even if they have an interview for the immigrant visa. But anyway, moving on to the next slide, I will just point out all the exemptions. The final thing I just want to add is if you have, and I'll probably emphasize this again before I talk about the exemptions, the non-immigrant visa people, they are not affected. So yeah, so I mean, for now it's okay, but we don't know. Maybe 2 weeks later there'll be another executive order. But yeah, and for the rest, like I'll just talk about the exemptions right now. Okay, so for green card holders, okay, not impacted by the executive order. Next, people who are applying for immigrant visa, so coming in to the US, so they're currently outside the US, or if they are spouses or children, and they're coming in on an immigrant visa, you know, for the medical field, and other essential work to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak, you are not impacted. And then people who are trying to get immigrant visas based on the EB-5 investor program, not affected. Spouses of US citizens, you know, they may not be Americans. Spouses of US citizens, not affected. So if you are applying for immigrant visa at the US embassy based on marriage to a US citizen, you are not impacted. You have children of US citizens under the age of 21, not impacted. Prospective adoptees for the IR4 and IH4 immigrant visa, not affected. People who would further important US law enforcement objectives, not impacted, but we don't know what exactly that means because it says as determined by DHS and DOS, so it's a little bit vague. US Armed Forces, members of US Armed Forces and their spouses and children, Afghan and Iraqi nationals who are translators, and their spouses or children, for the special immigrant visa, and those who are those whose entry will be in the national interest. So and as I mentioned, non-immigrant visa holders not affected. Applying for non-immigrant visas not affected. Asylum seekers also not affected. But one thing I just want to add before we move on is this proclamation actually includes a clause or a paragraph requiring a review of the temporary non-immigrant visa programs within 30 days of this executive order. So what it means is that there may be something that would impact non-immigrant visa holders down the road. We don't know exactly what it is. And I think, only time will tell, but we continue to keep our fingers crossed. Just one small FYI, parts of this executive order is currently subject of a lawsuit as well. So that is also something that's ongoing. All right, next slide. So anyway, based on a lot of people's responses on the survey, a lot of you probably are not affected by the current executive order. Okay, so now you have available that the US government reminded people about in the meantime due to COVID-19. So I think there are some people who might be trying to get a visa interview appointment, either for a new visa, for visa renewal issues. To the best of my knowledge, they actually do allow for emergency appointments. And so usually a typical procedure for those of you who have already started the process of trying to book is that you go ahead and continue booking. There will be a calendar that opens up, but it may not be as soon as you would like. And then after you lock in a date further down the road, you use the platform to put in your request for an emergency appointment. Some of you have your company's immigration lawyers working with you to help you with, so do consult them for details on how to do this. But there are requirements for those seeking an emergency visa appointment. Next, you have the USCIS has reminded people that you can, still apply for extension or change of status, even though they have temporarily suspended in-person services. So like the front office, you go for interviews or go for fingerprinting, suspended, but the back office work, processing applications, they are ongoing. So this is something that USCIS has reminded people. For example, if people are not able to get plane tickets on time due to COVID-19, or maybe afraid to travel for now, this is something that USCIS has reminded people what they can, something they can do. But I just want to remind you that there's no guarantee on the outcomes. Like each individual case will require different specific thing to be done, and so yeah, it's unfortunately pretty complex. But anyway, in general, USCIS has reminded people about this. So finally, satisfactory departures for visa waiver program travelers. You have the ESTA people, and some of these people really, and I've encountered some, really they had tough time booking plane tickets out, maybe even plane tickets cancelled. And ESTA is a very limited time. You are generally admitted here for 90 days, and so you couldn't get a plane your plane ticket that you originally bought, for example, before the 90 days it's up, got cancelled because of COVID-19, and the only plane ticket you could get was like 1 week after the 90-day period. So you have this thing called satisfactory departure, where you may apply for an extension of up to 30 days of your admission period if you're unable to depart the US because of COVID-19. So both USCIS and CBP have the authority to hear such requests. Yeah, I can't speak to the details of that right now, but a lot of this also depends on which airport you arrived in. And so, yeah, it's kind of confusing because um, the US immigration authorities, they say that you have both USCIS and CBP have the authority to hear such requests, but currently a lot of operations under USCIS is suspended, so it's very hard to put in a request to USCIS at the same time. So anyway, this is on a case by case individual basis, and I'll be happy to answer questions on an individual basis based on people's individual questions. Yeah, this is for people on ESTA. And again, no guarantees that they will approve it. That's unfortunate, but we have to remember that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when I was talking with the organizing committee, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was Singaporeans and the U.S. immigration system, because I think we have, with all the gloomy stuff happening, with Buy America, Hire American, and with COVID-19, with suspension of services. I just want to maybe take this time to remind us that Singapore is in a coming from Singapore, we are still in a relatively okay position compared to many other countries. So I just want to bring this up. So in large part due to our good diplomatic ties with the US, we actually enjoy some advantages actually with the US immigration system. So the more obvious advantages are, not every country has ESTA. And Singaporeans are also eligible for the green card lottery. So not every country is eligible. We have, thanks to the FDA, we have, the H1B1 work visas and the E1, E2 treaty trader / investor visas. So not every country has that. And so, yeah, we are pretty fortunate. And there are some other advantages, maybe less obvious ones, like for Singaporean J1 exchange visitors, normally they don't have to, especially if they are not, their J1 program is not sponsored by the Singaporean or the US government. Typically, they don't experience complications with they call it the 2-year home country physical presence requirement, which generally requires J1 people to be back in their home country for 2 years after the conclusion of their J1 program. And typically, this isn't a major issue for Singaporeans, but it is a major issue for J1 people from other countries. So this is less obvious, but this is one of the advantages of being Singaporean. And you have priority dates, meaning basically, for some of you who have gone through the green card process or going through it now, you've heard of this thing called priority dates. It's basically a reflection of the fact that there is a line to get an immigrant visa, line to get a green card. And the line is super long for people born in India or China. But that's generally not the situation for people born in Singapore. Unfortunately, this is for people born in Singapore. So it's not enough that you're a Singapore citizen, but you must be born in Singapore as well. Or if your spouse is born in Singapore, then you're generally not subject to the super long waiting line that many people from India and China experience, especially for the employment-based immigration cases. All right, next slide. Okay, so yeah, so we'll end off this part with a general FAQ, and I just want to touch on some of these general questions. And again, I apologize. I think unlike previous talks, I cannot. I will probably end up being a bit general here, but happy to talk to individual people outside of this forum. So anyway, so some of these questions have actually been answered during the presentation, but we'll talk about that again. So you have somebody who's currently in Singapore. So how are visa applications at the U.S. Embassy in Singapore affected? Routine visa services are suspended, but based on my Singaporean context, based on my current knowledge, you are still able to either make a visa appointment later down the road, so delay, or request for an emergency expedited appointment earlier, subject to their approval. And if you're talking about non-immigrant visa applications, they are not impacted by the current executive order. All right, next, I'm currently in the US. What are the options available for Singaporeans currently here who are unable to book a timely flight out? So earlier I mentioned about the option that that USCIS has reminded people about, which is you may extend your status or change your status to a different status. For example, changing from a work visa status to a visitor status, for instance. There are options. Okay, and then you have people who are here in the US with a pending green card application. So how is it being affected? Okay, so for this, right, I would say you're gonna face delays. That some of you may be waiting for your green card interview, but others are earlier on in the process waiting for fingerprints to be taken. Either way, there'll be delay because they cannot complete your green card application processing without conducting an interview. Having said that, there are certain situations where they actually are starting to waive the interviews. So these are more common if you are the green card application. For example, if it's not based on marriage, for example, if it's based on, say, the parent of a US citizen above 21 years old. Some of these cases, because the USCIS knows that it's maybe easier to tell whether there's a parent-child relationship versus a marriage relationship, they feel like interview is not required to verify. Some of them actually waive the interview and approve the case, the green card case. So, but other than that, you probably are generally looking at a delay in your case. However, as some of you already know, when you have a pending green card application here in the US, you're allowed to apply for a work permit and travel permit. So those are renewable as long as your case is still pending. So even if there's a delay, you have your work permit and travel permit, which is renewable. So is there going to be more delay in your green card application moving forward? Yeah, just be prepared for that. But like I said, if you have a pending green card application here in the US through what we call the adjustment of status process, you do have the option of applying or renewing work permit and travel permit. The work permit, as you know, is the EAD card, employment authorization document. And the travel permit, the technical term for it is advanced parole. but I just call it work permit and travel permit because it's easier to understand. Next, you're currently in the US, you have a pending non-immigrant visa application. How is it being affected? While it's pending, typically if it's, and I'm stating this in general terms because really it depends on the specific situation, but in general, say for example, you came here on a B2 visitor visa and you were admitted on B2 status and you have applied to extend the B2 status with USCIS. While it's pending, you're still okay. This is a very general answer. It depends on your specific situation. How long specifically, it depends on your specific situation as well. So it is affected, obviously, because for a lot of these cases, USCIS, the back office is still open. So they still process this, but just be prepared for some delays. But at least you know that it is not like they've stopped accepting these types of applications. For example, some people may apply to change status. For example, from a work visa status to a different status, apply to change status. Again, in general, these applications are still accepted. So if you submit them before the applicable deadline, they will still accept it. And so when they accept it and it's still pending, generally speaking, you're okay if it's still pending. In other words, if everything is done timely and in a proper way and correct things are being filed with regard to say change of status application or extension of status application, if it's done properly and in a timely fashion, then there is no immigration violation after your expiration date of your initial status. Because that the position is that while it's still pending, you're still okay. Even though you don't know whether it's approved or denied yet at that point in time while it's still pending. The final thing that that also part of our discussion during the organizing when we discussed this when we organized for today's talk is, when should people seek the assistance of an immigration attorney? I think my short answer is this: if you are planning to talk to an experienced immigration attorney, because your current actions now, your current strategies now, no matter how minor or short-term they may be, may impact your long-term immigration plan in the US. So it's better to get things right now, do things properly now, because then you don't impact something that's long-term. So that's my short answer. Some of you are on work visas. Your company probably has an immigration attorney. Communicate with him or her. And so, proper strategy can be done. Unfortunately, US immigration is complex. It's unfortunate and probably some would even say unnecessary. The US tax law system and the US immigration system are two of the most complicated systems for people to navigate, unfortunately. So I would say if you have a longer term plan in the US, it's probably best to make sure that you are doing everything properly by consulting with experienced immigration law
Hello, this is Jazz. Have I been booted from the conference? Is everybody still on? I think we might have lost Junwen temporarily.
I think
Perfect.
it's Junwen. Junwen's connection has a problem. Looks
Yes.
like he's breaking in and out his internet connection.
Well, great. Thanks. Thanks for letting me know. I think he's just come back in. Junwen.
Okay, I'm back.
Perfect. Thank you. We just lost you here. This is you were just talking about when we should.
Okay, I think before I was cut off, I already answered when. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. So this has been super helpful. I know everyone's everyone participating is just like listening to you very closely because there's so much nuance, right, to all that's out there, and then the circumstances around which the U.S. government is making some of these decisions. We really understand. However, at the same time, we also understand the overall broader context around the current government's um, desire to kind of limit immigration as well. So we certainly have a number of questions that came through previously in some of the different discussions, but we, just online here, we had Yensin who kind of talked about how he had an emergency appointment in the U.S. Embassy in Singapore and was able to do this successfully and return to San Francisco. It sounds like a positive experience in terms of getting some kind of waiver there. So, Junwen, have you heard of such instances before? So it sounds like certainly.
Sorry, bad connection. Could you repeat your question?
Sure, I was just saying, have you heard of such instances where the U.S. embassies in Singapore and in other territories are able to kind of process applications, so folks are able to come back to San Francisco. So this is under some of the emergency appointments that are taking place around the world, and especially in Singapore, where Yen Sim was able to get access to.
Okay, yeah. Yen, nice to see that you're here. And yes, we are lucky. We're lucky to be Singaporeans. We're lucky that we have good diplomatic relationships with the U.S. I feel that the U.S. Foreign Service officers who work in Singapore, they know that Singaporeans are a good bunch of people. The relationship with U.S. is stable, and so generally they do not give major problems to Singaporeans who are honestly seeking a visa application there at the embassy.
Mm-hmm. Got it. We also have some additional questions from participants. I think Clarissa just asked a question. Why doesn't the US check passports when departing the US? I think in Singapore, we have, the people at the airline counter checking our passports, but it doesn't seem like that's the case the other way around.
Oh, sorry, bad connection again, but is it basically the question that's on the screen right now?
It is, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, US doesn't check the passport typically. I think even, yeah, they did not check as well, personally for me. But interestingly, the US actually keeps a record of your departures whenever possible. Later on in the final slide where I give you links, you will see one link and some of you already know it, which is your I-94. The I-94 is administered by the CBP for you to check, the expiration date of your authorized period of stay in the US. There's actually another button there for you to check your travel history on the I-94, on the CBP I-94 website. And you'll be surprised to see that they actually have a record of your departures from the US.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
For most of the time, yeah. Sometimes they don't, but most, no.
Got it. And Junwen, here are some of the questions that came in previously from the survey, right? Which I think you've reviewed, and I know you sort of addressed some of them in the higher level FAQs. But do you have any other additional comments
Mm.
related to some of these questions if we kind of did a little bit of a blitzkrieg through them?
Okay. First, let's exclude the questions that I cannot answer first, which is questions with regard to the citizenships of, with Singaporean parents and you have children maybe born here or raised here, and you're thinking about their Singapore citizenship options, questions regarding, anything, to do with the Singapore citizenship. I cannot answer that, but typically it's probably a better question for the Singapore government. But other than that, I would say that this, as you've seen from the slides, right now things, unfortunately, due to, as per everything, things are in flux, including immigration, partly due to primarily due to COVID-19, and also partly because you have currently the immigration landscape here in the US is not very friendly towards immigration at this time. However, having said that, as you know, thanks to the good diplomatic relationship between Singapore and the US, and this is obvious because, currently, you don't have any travel bans with regard to Singapore, even during the past 3.5 years of the current administration as well. So in view of that background, I think although you will for sure experience delays, you will, there is some level of uncertainty. I would say that just continue to just don't assume that the door is closed, basically. We already saw that aspects of the US immigration engine is still ongoing. It's not perfect, but it's ongoing. You have also seen that US Embassy in Singapore is still accepting visa interviews. You have also seen, as for those of you who are having applications being just waiting, they will be looked at, and so it's evidence to show that things are they're still trying to move forward, but yeah, it's tough, and we also don't know, like, in a few weeks' time, if there's going to be another new executive order or not. Having said that, as of today, at least, a lot of things that impact, especially the people here today. I've seen the survey questions. I've seen the people on various visa categories. Thankfully, I think most, or if not virtually all of you, would still, you can still move forward with your cases. There will be specific questions. I know you have people talking about AOS portability. You have people talk with regard to your strategies with regard to renewing your H1B1s. I mean, I'm able to answer specifically to all these questions. These are not new questions to me, but I think we'll probably not deal with that specifically in this forum, but feel free to connect separately.
Got it. Suffice to say, it appears that if the visa is applying, you could help with, reapplication or some kind of postponement.
Actually, one more thing. I just saw a very interesting question, which is number 12. And this is a question that I think maybe even some of the people from the Singapore Consulate General have encountered from fellow Singaporeans, which is, what are the best visa options for Singaporean without green card looking to start a startup in the US? I think for the people who are entrepreneurs, right? I think I can answer the advantage Not all countries have it. If you want to start something in the US, that will be my general answer that you may consider, because we can take advantage of the fact that we are Singapore citizens.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Thank you. Wow, Junwen, that's a lot for us to process. I think we're all sort of thinking through a lot of these different detail and wondering how each of these things apply to us, right? So I know that certainly that, you know, everyone can reach out to you, and I'm just going to flesh your information here again. Your LinkedIn profile, you know, which I think is your preferred way for the you know, for members here to connect with you. But you've also provided some useful links for us to leverage. Potentially to follow up so we can learn more about the environment as well.
Yeah, the first link is actually a blog that I started. I just decided to, I was visiting Finland, and I was like, okay, maybe, you know, because I often get very, some questions regarding H1B1, I wanted to clear up, because actually a lot of companies and actually also a lot of immigration lawyers here in the US, they're not familiar with the H1B1 at all. So I just, you know, blogged a little bit about the nuances of it. So that's the first link. The second and third links are, you know, USCIS and DOS website respectively. USCIS is useful in the sense that if you have a case pending with USCIS, there's an online case status for USCIS. And so you have the US Embassy in Singapore website. There, most of you who deal with the US Embassy probably come across it anyway already. But the one that I want to also bring up is the CBP I-94 website. Earlier I mentioned that's something that, for those of you who don't know, is something you can check to check your expiration date of your current authorized period of admission, and even your travel history to the US. The caveat here, my disclaimer here is, unfortunately, there are instances, not many, but there are, where CBP did not correctly input the info. But okay, it's there. But there are ways to fix it. And you have ICE updates for students and exchange visitors. So if you are here on the F1 or J1, as we mentioned earlier, ICE is actually in charge of students and exchange visitors in the US. And so they have
Oh dear, I believe we have lost Junwen again. But, you know, as we conclude this evening's session, oh, Junwen, are you back?
Oh, but it's okay. The last link is basically if you want to report instances of, it's not technically immigration related, but if you want to report instances of COVID-19 related acts of racism, that's a website you can go to report it. It's Asian Americans Advancing Justice. They're based in California, headquartered in California.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. I've got a couple of interests from team members, from participants here, Junwen, regarding extension of their work travel permit and figuring out, while their immigration application is pending, what would be considered the sufficient number of months, right, ahead of expiry would be timely, right? So this is Indra's question, and then
Oh, I apologize. My connection is bad, or I couldn't hear your question. Can you repeat it?
Oh, we just have a couple of questions that have come through the chat window, and we're suggesting that perhaps you reach out to them or they reach out to you directly to answer some of these questions. We'll transcribe them into the window here, as you can see, but given that you have a poor connection, I think your suggestion in any case would be that they reach you directly, right, for advice.
Yeah, because because these questions, like, I have to actually, I mean, really listen to your specific questions and your specific circumstance. Like, I cannot tell from the question alone what exactly your current status is, and so it really depends on your circumstance.
Got it. All right. So we'll have them reach out to you.
Yeah.
As we conclude today's session, I'd like to invite also members of the MFA to kind of maybe comment a little bit on, some of the questions that we've heard, right, that Singaporeans have been raising to you as well, and some of the things you think we should be aware of as we go through this process. So thanks, Junwen. Hui Hui or Daryl, any comments?
Hi, Hui Hui here. So with regard to like questions, I think Junwen gave us a very good overview of how the immigration system is like in the US and everything. But with regard to like specific questions, I think it's best for Singaporeans to also check with the US authorities, be it whether to extend the stay or like visa status, that we would not be in a position to advise because that would be under the prerogative of the US immigration authorities. But what I would say is that do give sufficient time and not wait until the very last minute, because you do not want to run the risk of having overstayed or like, have some immigration records with the US authorities as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. That's good to know. Appreciate your feedback there. Junwen, any parting words before we close today's session?
Well, I guess, thanks for your patience. And I think as Singaporeans, I just want to leave us with this. I tell you from my experience that employers, I know many of you here are working here. A lot of employers really love Singaporean employees, and this is a testament to, it's a testament to our country. Just makes me foreign.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. And I think, as you mentioned as well, the fact that we have a good standing with the US government is also testament to the MFA's our diplomatic efforts between the two countries. Super. Thank you, Junwen. I think there's been suggestions about going back to some of the original speakers as well, as things have changed right over time, and to maybe share some of their observations too. But certainly, we also thank you, Daryl, for your updates on what's happening on the ground in Singapore. It certainly provides us some assurances and some real-time and factual sort of updates right on what's happening. So many thanks to the MFA for being here and staying with us through this process. Surely a very intense period for you and Hui Hui. Thank you. Hui Hui, any updates from you before we close off too?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you again. And I know you were very much part of the prep with Junwen as well, giving him a sense of some of the different concerns and considerations Singaporeans have been facing, right, that require maybe assistance from someone like him. Perfect, thank you. Now, Karen, any thoughts before we sign off today?
No, thank you so much, Junwen and Jasmine. I think following up with Junwen's, that question and answer would be useful because some of it we didn't quite catch, and I think the chat also shows that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And then here's the volunteer information for you as well as Xuan Hong. If anyone's interested in helping out, right, in some of the different initiatives as well, to kind of contribute to the effort there. So it's very exciting what you're doing, and hopefully, some Singaporeans here will be able to step up and assist as well. Now, David, so much of what's been possible today in these past number of weeks, right, in finding the speakers and finding the topics, that's been down to you and your cultivation of the WhatsApp communities and Slack communities there. Any parting words before we conclude today?
Hello, Jasmine. I'd just like to thank Junwen for contributing for this session. Just to share some background about Junwen as well. So I have known him for about a year or so since I came on board Singapore Global Network. He's been very, very helpful, not just for this event, but for previous Singapore events as well. So do give a shout out to him, connect with him on LinkedIn. And if you have faced any immigration visa issues, I'm sure he's more than happy to advise you and help you accordingly. Yeah, and also just a special shout out as well. I think for these events, many of you don't see what's happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of prep work ongoing discussions, the speakers, and so on and so forth. So if you are interested to help out, whether it's for the session or you have something to contribute that you think Singaporeans would be interested as well, feel free to reach out to us. More than happy to discuss with you further. And of course, do join the Singapore Global Network as well. I will provide the sign up link in the chat box. So you'll be kept updated about what's happening, whether it's back home or over here in the US.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you. Indeed, I believe Junwen, as I mentioned before, is certainly one of those people with extraordinary ability, and those others out there who have extraordinary abilities too, in terms of being able to contribute our topics and share. I'm super glad that to have you kind of share your experiences and support the community too as we grow. Now, Mark, any parting thoughts before we close off? We from SingaporeConnect are super glad.
Okay, I'll just say thank you. Just want to thank you, Jasmine, for moderating, and
Sure.
Junwen, very much for your time.
Got it. Thank you. And everyone here, it's a super fluid situation. We're certainly keeping the pulse on the ground. So feel free to send in your surveys ahead of time. Give us the feedback. That's really what we lean on to help us frame the sessions ahead. And thank you for your participation, everyone, and especially for Junwen today, but for sure, of all these weeks, right? Daryl, Hui, Karen, David, Mark, and the community, right, for your active participation in ensuring that we as a community continue to stay connected as well as informed. Meanwhile, till we speak again next Sunday, stay safe and keep in touch. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.